So thank you so much for joining us today. It's amazing to have it's an interesting, clearly this is a topic that many people are interested in because we've had a huge number of people sign up for the webinar. What that means is that I have actually muted you, so you won't be able to, I can't hear you at the moment, obviously to control the experience for everybody who's coming in. However, what we are able to do is we will be making a video of the recording, and I will ask you to interact throughout the piece here and there just to check there are people out there by giving you the opportunity just to chat. So if you might want to check where the chat box is, down below on your screen. That's where you can actually ask questions. If you do want to ask questions along the way, do please feel free to do so. Type them into the chat box. I've got colleagues on hand who are going to keep an eye on them, so they will message me and I'll address them towards the end. So Helen and Gemma, I know you're there in the background. Guys, if you can keep an eye on the chat for me and make sure to them. So we'll save all the questions to the end and we'll open up chats. But if you want to ask things as we go through, please do feel free to do so. Okay, so I'm going to kick off now. So welcome to today's webinar, which is about demonstrating the strategic value of HR by building an HR or learning and development. So my background is learning and development. We're not leaving that out. Balanced scorecard, and we'll look at both aspects of this. Just to introduce myself, my name's Lucinda Carney, and the slide will change shortly, I'm hoping, so that I can show you that. So it's a little bit slow just when we get started. So my name's Lucinda Carney. I'm a chartered psychologist, and I've got what I would now describe, I've stopped saying how many years actually I spent in corporate L&D, too many. I actually am the founder and CEO of Actus software, so this is how we host the event. And I'm also hosting an HR Uprising podcast. And actually, if any of you have come across the podcast, please do type yes into the chat box. I'd be interested to see if any of you found us this way. I will put links at the end on the final slide. There are links to the podcast because we've already got a podcast on this topic. So if you're someone who quite likes to reflect and listen to things back, then that is also something that you can listen to on this topic. And we will make a recording of this webinar available as well. Okay, so moving on. Why do we feel that actually in HR we need to be better at demonstrating strategic value? And I think this is something, personally, I'm finding it slightly irritating that it's continually seems to be a criticism that's leveled at us that you don't necessarily hear to other areas of the organization. I think the reason is, though, that many people feel that there is a growing need for them to business strategy. So they're being asked to support business strategy. We need to be seen as being strategic. We're getting more and more requests for people want to have greater business skills. Perhaps if we've come through a straight HR route without any experience in other aspects of the business, we may not feel as confident we've got those broader commercial skills. One of the aspects is about how do we turn strategy into action? And I think that's probably one of the most important things that we can learn to do. And that is really quite a key focus of this webinar. So how can we come and put in place a strategy and then translate it into action? And then also, how do we make sure that we are linking this to measures? And the purpose really of having aligned KPIs is it allows us to make sure that people are, I suppose it makes sure that we are actually demonstrating value. And if we're going to put in place, let's say, training programs or initiatives that require investment, we need to have some sort of measures to show that investment's being spent wisely. So, of course, how can we do that? So before I go on to that, I just wanted to get a sense from a show of metaphorical hands, which is using your chat box. In terms of the people that I've got on the call, because it's quite interesting last time, the numbers that I got on this particular webinar. If you think about your level of confidence, how confident do you feel about A, being strategic, and then B, defining success metrics? So in a moment, I'll ask. So the scale that I'd say is if you don't feel at all confident, then give a 1. If you feel extremely confident, then give it a 5. And if it's somewhere in between, clearly you can choose 2, 3, or 4. So the first question is how confident, give yourself a 1 to 5 confidence rating about how confident you feel about being strategic within your business. And just type your response into the chat box for me. Thanks, guys. So I'll give you a quick. I haven't got a clever polling device on this particular one. So we've got, well, the average would probably be 2 or 3, but no one said 5, and quite a number have said 1 or 2. So which of course makes sense, because I presume that's why you're here. So I'm hoping that we can maybe demystify some of this, because actually I think it's something that we feel we're not being strategic, or we're told we're not being strategic, and actually it may not be, as I've got a theory on this that I'll go into in a moment. Second one is, how confident do you feel about defining metrics or success metrics for the bit of the business that you support? So it's the same deal, 1 to 5 scale, 1 not at all, 5 extremely, and obviously you've got options in between. So this would be success metrics or KPIs that are demonstrating how effective you are. Okay, so I'm getting much more of a 1s and 2s. So hopefully, please stay tuned in. I'll try and keep the webinar to about half an hour or so, half an hour, 45 minutes. Have some ideas that will help you on both of those by the end of this webinar. So what the research says this, the messaging generally says this in terms of what CEOs want from HR, is they say that we need to evolve up the value chain. Now, what do we mean by that, and how do we do that? And I think it's really tricky, because quite often we, especially if anyone is here in a standalone role, actually feel free to put that in if there's just 1 or 2 of you. I think it's much, much harder than if you're in a team of a corporate bunch of people. What we find is that you need to, in order to evolve up the value chain, you need to be able to operationalize transactional HRM, so HR activities. So the essential activities like recruiting, compensation, those sort of things that actually suck your time up and often are highly administrational, they need to be operationalized. And by operationalized, we're saying that is get managers to do them, automate them, use systems and processes that can do them, so that you are not having to do loads of spreadsheet manual admin. When you operationalize and turn them into business as usual, that frees you up. Ideally, you're going to have some sort of systems that gives you some data, and that will give you an increased focus on your strategic aspects. That means you can look at what the data is saying, and allows you to take a step back and just see the bigger picture, to understand whether or not the recruitment process or activities that you're delivering is increasing engagement, is increasing performance, and whether it's having a greater impact on the business. But it's so hard to be strategic if you're very, very busy doing operational stuff. And it's about thinking, how can I carve out that time to sit back and think, where is the business going, and what impact can I have on that business? One of the ways of doing that is about helping the business, or of course doing it yourself, see links between the business strategy and people stuff. And to many of us, this might be really common sense, but quite often in large parts of the business, it really, really isn't. So if, let's say, the business has got a major target, which is about business growth. So whether that's, let's say it's growth in terms of revenue. Well, there are various HR or people things that could influence that, or be influences of the business growth. Clearly, there are other indicators as well. So if you sit in marketing, your go-to-market strategy, your campaigns, all of those implement and affect business growth. But one aspect of impacting business growth would be making sure that everybody in the organization has got really clear targets or goals that are driving their performance in the same direction that business wants to go. All too often, people have objectives or goals that actually are going in different directions, which is diluting their effort. So one of the ways of making links is by getting into this term, which means that, and helping people see. So if you want business growth, well, that means that we need to make sure that everybody has got clear goals, which means that they are clear and aligned with the right direction of the business, and we're all going in the same direction, and we're highly effective. Another way in which you might think about aligning business growth with business strategy might be considering aligning your reward. So you might want to have some sort of bonus system or some performance related pay that might be linked to your commissions, which are linked to business growth. So that's something, again, that would fit into the HR remit. And it may be that you're going to try and incentivize the activities that are driving business growth. Say we want to grow in a specific market, we might look at putting in place incentives that encourage activities of growth in that market. Of course, talent retention, it's really expensive, not just in terms of actually recruitment costs, but bringing people organization and getting them up and performing. So therefore, retaining talent, that in itself is going to support business growth. It's very easy to take our people stuff for granted, but if we retain our talent, it means that people are fully operational, they know their job role, and they're ready to take the business forwards. And of course, motivation, which means that the business is going to grow because everybody's coming to work ready to do the best they can. We could link this to engagement, but it's all about driving people in the right direction. So quite often people, if let's say you're in a board role in HR, often those other people, your peers around that board table, don't see the link. They see these as HR activities, almost like they're a luxury. But actually, what we need to do is make those connections, help people see those links. Even if it's a slightly indirect link, it's about communicating. If we have motivated staff, this means that they come to work ready to give of their best. When they spot a business opportunity and it means working till 8 o'clock in the evening, they're going to do it, which means we achieve business growth faster than the competition who've got demotivated staff. Hopefully you can get the idea there as to what I'm talking about there. So we need to get on our pedestal and be prepared to communicate the links to those around us. And actually, that is being strategic. So next thing is here is, though, how easy is it for you to actually be strategic? I've got a little personal story here. So I worked for Siemens, the telecoms bit of Siemens, for about 10 years, and I left 10 years ago. And I reported into the HR director when I started out, and he was an interesting guy, actually. I remember having a competency. We had competencies that had just been introduced into the appraisal, and he gave me various ratings, which I agreed on, in the level that he rated me at across a number of these things. And then it came to strategic thinking, and he looked at me and went, "No, you're not really strategic." And it was really interesting. I said, "Okay, so can you give me an example of what strategic looks like in this role, or actually why you don't think I'm strategic?" And he couldn't give me an example. And I said, "Okay, let me give you an example of why I think I'm strategic." And I explained a number of things where I'd put in place training courses, which were designed to proactively address a skills gap that we knew we were going to have in 2 years' time, and various other aspects in which I'd engaged with the business strategy and I'd implemented things which were within my job remit. He then admitted that actually maybe those were strategic. We looked at the definition of the competency. Always good to have good definitions on your competencies. And it made me realize that actually the problem was with him. He did not, he wasn't strategic. I look back, he wasn't strategic, or not in the sort of big picture business strategic. He had the odd Machiavellian strategy, but that was more about himself. And I realized that he didn't find it very easy. Not everybody can. And therefore he found it hard to recognize in others. So what I'm saying to you is that you may well be strategic. You might be the most strategic person in your business. It's just that others are not necessarily being particularly strategic. So here's another question, and don't worry, I'm not going to name and shame anybody on this. But when I ran this webinar about 3 weeks ago, and I had a really high number of people said yes to this question, which I thought was quite interesting. So if I was to ask you, does your business, in fact, sorry, I'll start with this one. Does your business have a clearly defined strategy or vision? So do you know what it is? You don't need to tell me what it is, but type in yes or no into the chat box if your business has a clearly defined strategy or vision, which has presumably been communicated. So far, you're doing better than the group. Actually, I'm liking that one. I won't say who it's come from, but I like the sort of here. Yeah, so it's perhaps needs a little bit more communication, are we saying? Okay, we've got a couple of no's as well. Not being communicated, possibly. I mean, this is it. I love it. Getting there, absolutely. So the thing is, how on earth can we in HR be strategic if the business hasn't got a clearly defined strategy or vision or goals? And it's all very well us being criticised, but actually you've got to start, for us to be strategic, we've got to start with understanding where the business is going. So one message I would definitely say, and I love the fact that someone's saying they're getting there, is the fact that sounds like you're influencing it. See it as part of your role to go and ask the question or help the board, whatever your level, help people define that strategy, get 3, 4, 5 key strategic goals. They don't have to be at a very high level. They don't have to be really smart. They just need to be clear so that people understand where the organization is going. Any of you who've ever done engagement surveys, one of the main issues about that is people want to know what's expected of them. You can't really set objectives for people if you don't know what the overall goal is. So I encourage you to help your business get a clearly defined strategy or vision, or if it's not communicated, help them share it and make sure that that is disseminated. Then my second piece is, so some of you with the no's or possiblies, I'm assuming then the answer is no. Any of those of you who've said yes, do you actually have it cascaded, formally cascaded, so people really have clarity on how their roles fit into it? So say yes if you do, or type whatever you want, or no if you've not gone that far. So work in progress again for most people. And yeah, some optimism are going to say some of you are on the way. So great. So you know what you need to do. We all do. And it's about our role. One of the most strategic things we can do is help the organisation get to that position, help them have cascaded goals. And then the second part of this webinar, we can then align what we're doing in HR or learning and development against it. So let's assume that you are in this position where you actually have got this overall strategy in place. This is not rocket science, this is common sense, but sometimes common sense is just worth going through. How do you build that strategy? Well, whether you're whether you're an HR director or whether you're relatively junior, don't worry about that. Go in and arrange to spend time with that senior team asking questions. Be really curious. I did some webinars recently, and please do tune into the 12 HRs of Christmas webinars on the HR Uprising, talking to HR professionals. And the person I spoke to yesterday was saying he thought that the most important HR superpower was curiosity, because we need to just ask questions about things and understand what those key drivers and challenges are, because sometimes those who are making decisions, they may have blind spots. So if we get those key drivers and challenges, we can then be like the glue to start joining it together. So we can see opportunities strategically, but we can also go back to our which means that we can see how those drivers and challenges, and I'll give you an example in a minute, link to people related systems and capabilities. So we work it out, we understand the business drivers, then we've got to think out how they might link directly or indirectly, because it's not always a direct correlation. Then what we need to do is to consider what sort of enablers or solutions we might be able to put in place. And again, the joy of being in a people profession is the fact that it's very, very rarely just put something in and it happens. It may be a number of tweaks or nudges that we need to put in, all hoping that they are going to drive that output. So we define what we think the solutions are going to be. Then let's try and get them onto some sort of strategy map or visual, so that I'm a real believer in trying to get things onto one sheet of paper in a picture. I don't think anyone here is on the NHS. I didn't see any NHS names come in, but I work quite often with firms and organisations in the NHS, and their strategy, they have to do a strategy that is a paper, and it's a 40-page document. I don't see that you could. I'm not saying you don't have to do that for governance, but it's not really powerful or impactful or inspiring. And so my experience is, if you want to get buy-in, you need to get something of your strategy onto one piece of paper. And I'll give you an example I've done so that people can get it and they can hold on to it and buy into it. So you've then got your strategy. Then, of course, it's get on and implement that strategy. You've got to get that buy-in and funding if you need to. You need to also, of course, measure whether or not we're making progress. We may have thought the solutions was perfect. It may not be quite perfect. So it's never going to be the panacea. It's about implementing, gathering feedback, reviewing, and moving it on. So really simple 5 steps there, common sense in many ways. But let's go on and have a look at an example of a strategy on a page. So this is an example where there was a business that I was working with which had a real issue. Their business issue was that they were losing huge amounts of business to a new competitor, a really aggressive new competitor who'd come in. The technology was changing, and this competitor was particularly good at this new technology. So whereas the company I was working with was better in the old technologies. Not only that, this new sexy company was poaching loads of our people, and they were going over to the other side. So we were losing people and hemorrhaging talent. So clearly there were loads of other things in place about sales skills, lots and lots of strategies, but the people related strategy was how can we make a difference and sort people out really in terms of their roles. Now, the interesting thing is I'm starting at the bottom here. We actually would have started at the end. So what I'm going to do is build the whole picture up and then explain it backwards. So what we knew we needed was we needed to have internally, it was a dual strategy. We needed to have people with more skills, of the right skills and capability. So we needed to increase the skills within the organization in a certain area. Not only that, we needed to retain people. And these were in the days when engagement was quite new. And so it was about increasing engagement and retaining talent. And when we looked at why people were leaving, well, we talked to people that they were attracted by the other business, but also we didn't have particularly good people management activities in place. So what we did was we went out and did lots of focus groups to understand what people wanted and how they wanted to be managed. And actually, if you bear this in mind, this is probably about 15 years ago. And back then, people were saying they wanted to have regular conversations with their managers. So what we did was put in place a real clear expectations and process around how to deliver people management. There was a people management charter with 10 different activities, including monthly one-to-ones. We set in place expectations around ongoing performance management conversations, so positive people performance management. And we trained up our managers and gave them better skills around people management. So you can see that it starts with telling people what was expected of them. So we told the managers that they needed this charge, that in order to keep people, this is the purpose of their role. Lots of people who are in people management jobs don't really see that the people management is important. They see it as an afterthought or a bit of an irritation. So they had to set clear expectations and processes. They had to implement ongoing performance management. And then they had to put different activities in place. So we had skilled people managers, we gave them access to coaching and mentoring, and you can see there was various strategies that were put in place, including talent and career skills. What this resulted in was a much better, obviously this took a couple of years to embed. You got people feeling empowered, they were taking on, they were learning more, and it decreased our attrition rate significantly. So that was the key. Now, of course, how do we make this measurable? So the balanced scorecard, I'm not sure if any of you have come across this. Don't worry, we'll record it. I've just seen a couple of people having to leave. We'll record it. Let us know and we'll send you a link to the recording. Thank you for the note, Edith. So if we need to make this measurable, what we will do is we need to build a balanced scorecard. If you've heard of the balanced scorecard or if you haven't, it was developed by Kaplan and Norton. They were sort of Harvard professors in the 1990s. The key thing that makes it really powerful is it differentiates between lagging indicators. So many businesses are just measured on numbers, but if you think about it, the numbers, the balance sheet is really only telling you the results of what you did last year. So this allows you to look at things that are actually going to influence your results next year. So those sort of things are processes, the customers, your customer process. So processes like internal processes, whether it's production or manufacturing, and we'll look at what HR wants to be, things that influence the customer, internal or external, and also learning and growth, the growth of the organization. So that example I was looking at before would have been upskilling people so that they had the right skills within the organization. So how can we then translate this into HR or learning and development? So these are the sort of questions that you need to think about if you want to build your own HR or learning and development balanced scorecard. First of all, a financial, straightforward. How are we going to quantify? Well, you can work out how much you cost. The real sort of thing, they say, okay, you've got X number of heads and this is how much you cost. But that's not really the financial impact. It's not necessarily the right thing. It's thinking, how valuable are we? And again, that might be about thinking about, are we spending time on transformational activities or transactional activities when we had looked at that earlier slide. But think about how can we quantify the financial impact of what we're doing over this year. what value add are we putting back into the business? Are there any metrics with hard numbers on them that we can use? And I'll give you some possible examples of how you can do that. Next, on the next slide. Customer, how can we measure the breadth and effectiveness of our provision? How satisfied are our customers? Processes, what are our processes? Are they effective? Could they be more effective? And could we free up time by improving them? And then learning and growth, which is our organizational capacity. How are we future-proofing and aligning our HR or learning and development interventions with future business skill needs, looking to the future? So you can see how these are really quite forward-looking. And if we focus on having the right metrics, we're going to be and align these metrics with where the business wants to go, then we're going to make a difference. So I've got a learning and development one first, and this next slide I've got an HR one. So I'll just pick one from each of these to go through in the interest of time, but we can make these slides available to you if they'd be helpful to you. So it's not just about, for me, something like this is not about what you're spending it on in terms of metrics, or just how much does your training department spend. As I say, that's a bit of a lazy metric, and it drives the wrong behavior because you just cut costs. It's maybe thinking about how are you spending it. So this might be measuring, could we change? Let's say you wanted to train more people for less money, then you might still say training budget, but you'd look at the percentage of the spend on digital versus classroom training. So thinking about how you're doing it. Are there any other metrics that you can actually implement? So reducing cost of hire by upskilling people, any other metrics like that? Then over in customer, so this is thinking if it's a training role, this may well be about internal, the internal customers. So what percentage of people, how much, what proportion of your customer base are taking up the resources or courses? And again, actually an indirect measure would be people staying, because we know that people engagement is related to people having opportunities to learn and grow in the organisation. So that would have an indirect impact on people's retention potentially. Looking at process, well, let's think about things like compliance processes. Have we got those things which are really enabling us to manage and track compliance or making things auditable? You can how people are using your learning management system, or the processes for booking training need. How long does it take you to meet a training requirement? And then organizational capacity. Could we look at the extent to which people are upskilling? If you know there's a certain capability that you're short of, what percentage of people and this year have improved or gained qualifications or skill in that area compared to last year? And of course, that area is going to be aligned with your business strategy. So hopefully getting a bit of the feel for that. Let's move on to the HR one. So these are the sort of things that you could consider, and these are just examples. They're not exhaustive. And actually there is a book called the HR Scorecard, which you can get, Becker, Huslid and Ulrich, which has got loads and loads of examples in. But you could look at things like how much money recruitment. That's quite a straightforward one. You can think about, you could go for online recruitment, spend per hire. Obviously retention rates has a financial impact if you're going to backfill it. How much money you're spending on benefits or incentives, the proportions of your incentive pay and how you're distributing it, interesting financial metrics. In terms of customer, are we recruiting internally? What are our engagement scores like? Number of people per HR professional, that's an interesting one. And actually someone asked me last time what the number should be. There's a recommended number and I can't remember what it is. If anyone knows, please type it in. Process, speed to hire, absenteeism, effectiveness of our performance management process, our objective setting, absenteeism, any of these sort of procedural activities that are going on, how effective are they? Could we set targets in improving those, and in doing that freeing us up to add value elsewhere in the organisation? Then learning and growth. What proportion of people are giving feedback or using your recognition schemes? Success. Let's put a metric on our bench strength. How many of the key roles have got successes lined up for them? So you can see there's lots of ideas there, and most of those you can put a number or a metric on. And the thing is, it's just having a line in the sand. It may be that it may be impossible to influence it, but when you're if you put a metric in place like a KPI, then it's much, much easier for you to have a sense as to whether you're progressing. And you can track it monthly. So we use these in our business. We have scorecards, and it just gives you a sense. And particularly, actually, if you build it up over year on year, you can look at seasonality, and you can just have a sense as whether or not you're making progress. But you need to have those quantities in there in the first place, some sort of metric. Okay, so I'm almost through to the end. So if anyone has got any questions, do feel free to add them in. And I will just summarize here and draw to a conclusion. So one key point, I didn't mention it on the previous one, is I had 3 in each box. I'm not saying do that, maybe just 1 or 2 key metrics, but potentially do them against the balanced scorecard. So you'll know you're not just looking at financial metrics, and of course, align them with the business strategy. Try and make sure they're future oriented. So that's where I was saying the lagging indicators are more sort of training spend. That's historical. So it's more about indicators of where we're going or our proportions of training spend. Work with them, tweak them, see if they work for you. Don't measure stuff just for the sake of it. So for example, you can measure appraisal completion rate because that's something you might want to do, but actually, is that the right one? Maybe what we really want to see is, are people having regular one-to-ones? So think about how you can find measures for the things that are actually valuable as opposed to the things that are easy to measure. Okay, so this is my final slide that I'll leave with. Well, if there's any questions, then hi Wilona, nice to have you on. And yes, we will arrange for you to get the slides. I'll ask for Helen to send them out to everybody who's attended. I think we're recording this, so hopefully if I've managed to record it effectively, we'll have a link to this. But what I would say is, if you wanted to quickly listen to something similar, I've mentioned the HR Uprising podcast. You can get all the links from hruprising.com. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I did an episode on this. It was very similar content to this because I was referring to these slides myself. So you can go in and listen to the audio and then use these slides. Other papers, we've got lots of other content in terms of free performance management resources on the website. Please do feel free to avail yourself of those. And currently the plan for the next webinar is demystifying organizational development, because that seems to be a subject that people are interested in understanding more about. So that's the plan. We intend to do 1 a month through 2020 because we've had so much feedback about them. And then do feel free to link in with me if you're not already connected to me. Link with me on Twitter or otherwise. So I can see it's Friday. Happy Friday, everybody. I think everyone's gone shy. Feel free to disappear or otherwise, but we'll get the slides sent out to you. And thank you so much for joining. Thanks, guys. Bye.